garner presents. Merchant of Venice. Shylock, the Jew, lived at Venice. He was a usurer, who had amassed an immense fortune by lending money at great interest to Christian merchants. Shylock, being a hard-hearted man, exacted the payment of the money he lent with such severity that he was much disliked by all good men, and particularly by Antonio, a young merchant of Venice, and Shylock as much hated Antonio, because he used to lend money to people in distress, and would never take any interest for the money he lent. Therefore there was great enmity between this covetous Jew and the generous merchant Antonio. Whenever Antonio met Shylock on the Rialto, or exchange, he used to reproach him with his usuries and hard dealings, which the Jew would bear with seeming patience, while he secretly meditated revenge. Antonio was the kindest man that lived, the best conditioned, and had the most unwearied spirit in doing courtesies. Indeed, he was one in whom the ancient Roman honor more appeared than in any that drew breath in Italy. He was greatly beloved by all his fellow citizens, but the friend who was nearest and dearest to his heart was Bassanio, a noble Venetian, who, having but a small patrimony, had nearly exhausted his little fortune, by living in too expensive a manner for his slender means, as young men of high rank with small fortunes are too apt to do. Whenever Bassanio wanted money Antonio assisted him, and it seemed as if they had but one heart and one purse between them. One day Bassanio came to Antonio and told him that he wished to repair his fortune by a wealthy marriage, with a lady whom he dearly loved, whose father, that was lately dead, had left her sole heiress to a large estate, and that in her father's lifetime he used to visit at her house. When he thought he had observed this lady had sometimes from her eyes sent speechless messages that seemed to say he would be no unwelcome suitor, but not having money to furnish himself with an appearance befitting the lover of so rich an heiress, he besought Antonio to add to the many favors he had shown him, by lending him 3,000 ducats. Antonio had no money by him at that time to lend his friend, but expecting soon to have some ships come home laden with merchandise, he said he would go to Shylock, the rich money lender, and borrow the money upon the credit of those ships. Antonio and Bassanio went together to Shylock, and Antonio asked the Jew to lend him 3,000 ducats upon any interest he should require, to be paid out of the merchandise contained in his ships at sea. On this, Shylock thought within himself, if I can once catch him on the hip, I will feed fat the ancient grudge I bear him. He hates our Jewish nation, he lends out money gratis, and among the merchants he rails at me and my well-earned bargains, which he calls interest. Cursed be my tribe if I forgive him. Antonio, finding he was musing within himself and did not answer, and being impatient for the money, said, Shylock, do you hear? Will you lend the money? To this question the Jew replied, Signor Antonio, on the Rialto many a time and often you have railed at me about my moneys and my usuries, and I have borne it with a patient shrug, for sufferance is the badge of all our tribe. And then you have called me unbeliever, cutthroat dog, and spit upon my Jewish garments, and spurned at me with your foot, as if I was a cur. Well, then, it now appears you need my help, and you come to me and say, Shylock, lend me monies. Has a dog money? Is it possible a cur should lend 3,000 ducats? Shall I bend low and say, fair sir, you spit upon me on Wednesday last, another time you called me dog, and for these courtesies I am to lend you monies. Antonio replied, I am as like to call you so again, to spit on you again, and spurn you, too. If you will lend me this money, lend it not to me as to a friend, but rather lend it to me as to an enemy, that, if I break, you may with better face exact the penalty. Why, look you, said Shylock, how you storm. I would be friends with you and have your love. I will forget the shames you have put upon me. I will supply your wants and take no interest for my money. This seemingly kind offer greatly surprised Antonio, and then Shylock, still pretending kindness and that all he did was to gain Antonio's love, again said he would lend him the 3,000 ducats, and take no interest for his money, only Antonio should go with him to a lawyer and there sign in merry sport a bond that, if he did not repay the money by a certain day, he would forfeit a pound of flesh, to be cut off from any part of his body that Shylock pleased. Content, said Antonio. I will sign to this bond, and say there is much kindness in the Jew. Bassanio said Antonio should not sign to such a bond for him, but still Antonio insisted that he would sign it, for that before the day of payment came his ships would return laden with many times the value of the money. Shylock, hearing this debate, exclaimed, O Father Abraham, what suspicious people these Christians are! Their own hard dealings teach them to suspect the thoughts of others. I pray, you tell me this, Bassanio, if he should break his day, what should I gain by the exaction of the forfeiture? A pound of man's flesh, taken from a man, is not so estimable, profitable, neither, as the flesh of mutton or beef. I say, to buy his favor I offer this friendship, if he will take it, so, if not, adieu. At last, against the advice of Bassanio, who, notwithstanding all the Jew had said of his kind intentions, did not like his friend should run the hazard of this shocking penalty for his sake, Antonio signed the bond, thinking it really was, as the Jew said, merely in sport. The rich heiress that Bassanio wished to marry lived near Venice, at a place called Belmont. Her name was Portia, and in the graces of her person and her mind she was nothing inferior to that Portia, of whom we read, who was Cato's daughter and the wife of Brutus. Bassanio being so kindly supplied with money by his friend Antonio, at the hazard of his life, set out for Belmont with a splendid train and attended by a gentleman of the name of Gratiano. Bassanio proving successful in his suit, Portia in a short time consented to accept of him for a husband. Bassanio confessed to Portia that he had no fortune and that his high birth and noble ancestry were all that he could boast of. She, who loved him for his worthy qualities and had riches enough not to regard wealth in a husband, answered, with a graceful modesty, that she would wish herself 1,000 times more fair, and 10,000 times more rich, to be more worthy of him. And then the accomplished Portia prettily dispraised herself and said she was an unlicensed girl, unschooled, unpracticed, yet not so old but that she could learn, and that she would commit her gentle spirit to be directed and governed by him in all things. And she said, myself and what is mine to you and yours is now converted. But yesterday, Bassanio, I was the lady of this fair mansion, queen of myself, and mistress over these servants. And now this house, these servants, and myself are yours, my lord. I give them with this ring, presenting a ring to Bassanio. Bassanio was so overpowered with gratitude and wonder at the gracious manner, in which the rich and noble Portia accepted of a man of his humble fortunes, that he could not express his joy and reverence to the dear lady who so honored him by anything but broken words of love and thankfulness, and, taking the ring, he vowed never to part with it. Gratiano and Nerissa, Portia's waiting maid, were in attendance upon their lord and lady when Portia so gracefully promised to become the obedient wife of Bassanio, and Gratiano, wishing Bassanio and the generous lady joy, desired permission to be married at the same time. "With all my heart, Gratiano," said Bassanio, "if you can get a wife." Gratiano then said that he loved the Lady Portia's fair waiting gentlewoman, Nerissa, and that she had promised to be his wife if her lady married Bassanio. Portia asked Nerissa if this was true. Nerissa replied, "Madam, it is so, if you approve of it." Portia willingly consenting, Bassanio pleasantly said, "Then our wedding feast shall be much honored by your marriage, Gratiano." The happiness of these lovers was sadly crossed at this moment by the entrance of a messenger, who brought a letter from Antonio containing fearful tidings. When Bassanio read Antonio's letter, Portia feared it was to tell him of the death of some dear friend. He looked so pale, and, inquiring what was the news which had so distressed him, he said, "Oh, sweet Portia, here are a few of the unpleasantest words that ever blotted paper. Gentle lady, when I first imparted my love to you, I freely told you all the wealth I had ran in my veins, but I should have told you that I had less than nothing, being in debt,